the chat today. So Deanna is our fabulous presenter. Thank you, whoever Katrina is. That was very nice of you. Pass it over to Deanna, and then Deanna, just know that I'll probably be interrupting you if I need to let you know if there's something that's coming up.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate you guys all taking the time to be here. Whether or not it's required or not, it's still a choice to show up. So I do want to acknowledge that I know that you guys have a lot on your plates right now and are juggling a lot of different responsibilities and new tasks. So it can sometimes just feel like a little bit of an ask. It's a lot of a bit of an ask. So I really do thank you and welcome you today to this training. Let's see, I need to start sharing my screen. All right, so today we're going, just a quick check-in. Does everything look okay before I continue? Yeah, we're good. I can actually see some of your guys' faces, so always nonverbals are helpful. I think that's the toughest thing about virtual spaces, is just then you don't get as much as the interaction. And so I really do miss that. But I also really do acknowledge that I would not have the ability to have this big of an audience without the benefit of these virtual trainings. So I'm grateful for that. And Erin, I think, are you able to monitor the chat? And okay, perfect, because I cannot see the chat. So today we are, I was asked to come through Leslie Rogers. I actually was supposed to present this like a month ago during that first week of the wildfires, and they were really bad. And the smoke was so bad that the county offices shut down, and there was no way that I could host this from my house because my dogs would just interrupt me and I would be like so unable to stay focused. And that was also one of the days that the air quality was just at the astronomical toxic level. So I'm happy that we were able to host it again and provide this information. Today we're going to be talking about LGBTQ youth and mental health. This was earlier in the school year, I'm like, yep, that was only like a month ago, 6 weeks ago, I hosted another training that was mental health matters and BIPOC youth. And this was kind of like a series that I had dreamed up about a year ago, of just knowing that these are two populations that really do have some special needs and outreach when it comes to mental health, and that they're really high risk populations that we want to reach out to. And it really does fit in perfectly with the theme of today's professional development for you all around anti-racism and anti-bias, and really which is to grow and develop a safe and inclusive environment for your students and for yourselves and your staff. Today, although we're talking about LGBTQ, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is that intersectionality of that. We can't talk about LGBTQ without also talking about BIPOC youth, because you don't just get to be one when you are part of either community or part of both communities. All right. So I want to start with a mindful start. Things are always really hectic, and we feel like we're always on the go. So I just want to take this moment. I want to challenge you to arrive. I want to challenge you to not multitask during the rest of our time together. Turn off those emails and give yourself the gift of being present and learning and connecting. And to signal our bodies that it's time to learn and to help us make meaning of the information we're going to discuss today, I want you all to take a deep breath with me. And go ahead and push your shoulders back, allowing your spine to align. Push your feet into the floor, reminding yourself that you have a body and you are connected to it. If you need to, you can move your head around, raise up your arms, stand up if you need to, if you haven't stood up in a while, and just help yourself be present in this moment. What we're doing is somatic community building, and it is a way of bringing a group together And how we do that is through our body awareness, our whole self-presence, and our whole shared experiences. So I hope that our agreement today can be for your commitment to stay present and to attend. Try to focus on actively listening, trusting the process, assuming best intentions, and maybe even try to lean into discomfort a little bit as we go throughout today. With that, I encourage you to take another deep breath. And we'll go ahead and dive into this information. All right. So a little bit more about me. My name is Deanna Negretti. I'm with Washington County Behavioral Health. I'm in, my position is School Systems Liaison. I work with the school districts in Washington County, all 7 of them, and the juvenile department, providing mental health services through technical assistance, consultation, and system navigation. So really, I'm working a lot with our care coordinators in our school district, and then our juvenile counselors, and helping young people and families finding mental health services. I don't do any direct practice right now, but my background is in direct practice. I'm a licensed professional counselor, as well as I specialize in substance abuse. I've probably worked for like 90% of the nonprofits that service youth in Portland. And I really enjoy doing systems work though, and doing trainings. And that's what I've kind of spent the last 3 years doing. So a little bit more about me is, I think that coming to this presentation and coming with that framework around privileges, I want to talk a little bit about my privileges, because that's the framework I come to this training with, is that I am half Mexican, half Finnish. I am very fair-skinned though, so I have a lot of white privilege, and I've been given those privileges through the color of my skin. I am a cisgender female, that's how I identify. I use she, hers, and hers pronouns. I do identify as part of the queer community, and we'll kind of go dive into that deeper as we talk about terminology. For the most part, I'm neurotypical. I had an IEP all throughout my kind of K through 12 years, but that was something that I had a lot of supports, and a lot of great teachers and educators helped me learn how to learn. So I'm really lucky to have that, and definitely part of my privileges. I am average size, and I don't have any mobility issues that would cause me to have kind of supportive requirements. I think one of the biggest things about that, when we talk about privileges around like body, is like, if I go into a room or a space, can my needs be met? And for a large 99.9% of the time, yes, they can. So those are a little bit about my privileges and the lens that I come with to this training. And I think that's just important, because that's who I am as your presenter today. And that I definitely want to honor all of the experiences that you all have as well. So with our virtual training platform, as I kind of shared in the beginning, it's really great to have a virtual training platform, because we're able to have a large training that we probably wouldn't have enough space to have in like real time or real life. But it also comes with its challenges. So Erin's going to help me out with monitoring the chat today. So feel free to stick a question in there. There'll definitely be time at the end if you all want to unmute and ask questions live. And anything that I can't answer right now, or that I don't have the answers for, it will follow up later. We are going to have like a quick little brain break in the middle, but I really do want you all to get up, stretch. You don't have to have your camera on. That's totally your choice. Turn it on, turn it off. We do ask that you remain mute for the majority of the presentation though, just to help with background noises. But definitely, if this is a time where you can get some stretches in, can stand up, get your stand hour on your Fitbit or on your Apple Watch, I would love for you to do that to take care of your body and yourself. And then we're going to want you all to remain in whole brain. And that means that we're able to access all of our thinking, all of our problem solving, and all of our kind of higher ways of that we're able to navigate life. And we'll get into that more when we talk about trauma-informed care. So that was our virtual housekeeping. We're going to kind of jump into a snapshot of what is going on in the world, go over our terminology for today around LGBTQ, community and culture, have a quick TIC review, LGBTQ mental health review or snapshot, what LGBTQ in school kind of looks like for supports for students, the impacts of COVID on the LGBTQ community right now, and then how do we support our young youth who are part of that community. All right, so it's really, I think for all of us, our brains are just in that complete, like, what has happened since March mode. Honestly, this slide started with just the pandemic because I did a training pretty early on in the year, and it was like, well, I really want to acknowledge the pandemic. And then it was adding in the racial injustice revolution, the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, the deaths of our Black community, and then adding in the once in a lifetime regional fires that we've had in Oregon that have devastated our communities, and then adding in that we're going into an election season with a presidential election. So really, all of that is a lot for our brains and our bodies to handle and to deal with and to kind of sort out as we move through what our next 6 months are going to look like, our next year, even our current kind of life, what that looks like. So I want to share this quote with you all. And this was a quote that I found, again, early on, probably like early May. So, we will not go back to normal. Normal never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequality, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, one that fits all of humanity and nature. That quote is from Sonia Reed Renee Taylor, and she's an author, poet, spoken word artist, speaker, humanitarian, social justice advocate, educator, and the founder of The Body Is Not an Apology. I had probably around this time, I had a conversation with my dad, and he was like, well, I just can't wait for things to go back to normal. And my response was like, I don't want things to go back to normal. Like, too much has happened. I've grown too much. I've learned too much. And that, like, to go back to what was doesn't feel right anymore. And so, oh, there's our lights. Hold on. I told you it was going to be fun. Okay.
Excellent work.
We gotta just make it work. So that, I've grown too much, I've learned too much, and like really that garment doesn't fit anymore. It is like trying to put a pair of jeans on after you've had a very indulgent holiday season. It just doesn't work. That's not what I want to go back to. And I think that this has given us all an opportunity to move forward and to figure out how we can make this a better community for all. All right, so I brought up earlier intersectionality. I found this wheel of power and privilege like just the other day, and I thought it was really great as far as a visual to really see some of those privileges I shared about earlier when I was doing my introduction. And you can see that closer to the middle is the who holds the power, where the outside is the marginalized communities that we speak about. So one of the, when we're talking about the LGBTQ community, or when we're talking about the BIPOC community, that we also are recognizing that we're also part of all these other kind of slices of the wheel that hold privilege and or kind of hold power or privilege. And I thought this was just a great visual of that. And as we talk today, especially about the LGBTQ community, that it can really vary. And even when we talk about, you know, LGBTQ, we're talking about gender, we're talking about sexuality, and that those are even two different ways that we can hold power. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. And if I haven't said it before, that yes, these slides will be available, as I'm hoping that will be a question that you guys will want to relook at this stuff. So I will make those available, as well as put together some of the resources.
You're getting compliments on that picture and the quote, by the way. By the way, there's some requests.
Thank you. Yeah. This was not my work. I pulled it off of, I think it was Instagram. But
outstanding.
It's definitely a great visualization where we can kind of just see where we all fit. All right. So I'm going to go over terminology. I realize that we're all coming from kind of different spaces of like where we might know our terms. So I encourage you to, what doesn't make sense, ask questions or do your own research, and that these are things that we can, but I want for all of us to kind of be on the same page as we move forward. So LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, transgender, queer, and questioning. As you can see from the previous slide, it could also go on. It can be, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, allied, intersex, and then you have the plus. You know, I think for a lot of folks, that it's about representation, it's about making sure that people are feeling included. And I earlier said that I identify as queer, and that is just part of, for me, that means kind of that catch-all. And so that I think those are, and I'm also really realizing that as I age and get older, that all of these things and terms are changing. And so our young people today are using way different terminology, which we'll kind of get into in a little bit. But kind of the LGBTQ is a really general term that you'll hear a lot. And then SOGI is the other one that comes up a lot when you're talking more about like academic paper writing or academic research, and that's sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And again, we'll kind of jump into break those down a little bit more. All right, so this, okay, I had to minimize a little screen there. So I can't see your face anymore, Erin, so if you do have something, just pop on.
No problem.
So when we talk about the binary system, our binary is the two. So we have one end or the other. It is kind of the black or white. Binary system, male or female, two parts that are often served at polar opposites. And so it's that checking of the box of, are you male, are you female? I am guessing that a lot of you know that not everyone identifies as male or female, and there's a lot more than just checking of one of those boxes. And next we jump into sex, which is assigned at the presentation of external anatomy. So that's really when a baby is being born and the doctor says it's a blank. And that's really just from a brief look at that external anatomy. And as we kind of know, that external anatomy does not always reflect what's actually going on at the chromosomal level. And when we talk about chromosomal sex, there is, I was just like doing some additional research on it. And so there's like 6 recognized abnormal or chromosomal presentations, being XX, XY, XXY, XYY, and then XXXY. So, and then there's a like whole other kind of, when you dive into it deeper. I don't know if we have biology folks on this. I'm sure we do. You will know a lot more than I do. I didn't do well in biology. But that sex is really referring to what is that karyotype and the internal external presentation of the person. And then we also have intersex individuals, and those are individuals whose hormones, chromosomes, and anatomy differ than the medical community standards of that female male system, binary system. And then we have our gender, which is really open and really that social construction based on the group of emotions, behavior, and cultural characteristics. I think one of my biggest pet peeves is when people are like having a gender reveal party, is that really that's not what they're revealing. They're revealing the sex of what the person is seeing on the ultrasound. Are they seeing a penis or not a penis? And even when they see that, they might not actually be seeing that. So if we think of, and those are, so that's our, when we think of our sex is what is based on kind of our biology, our karyotype, and then our gender is based on our own, what's in our head, how we think of ourselves, and how kind of society has constructed that. How some people describe it is like sex is what's below the belt, gender is what is above. Whatever kind of helps you remember it, I think, is what's important. So when we get into gender kind of breaks down into these different categories of expression, identity, and presentation. Expression is how we express ourselves on the outside. So I express as a very feminine, and that is how I tend to express myself. Other days, and most days when I'm working from home, it's not, and I'm not doing a presentation, my expression might be a little bit more androgynous or not as feminine in nature, although I tend to lean more on the feminine side. Gender identity is how we perceive ourselves as it relates to our gender. I identify as being female, and I will also say that's what I was identified as birth. And then our gender presentation is how the world perceives us or understands us. I, for the most part, get that I am very feminine, I am perceived as a female. And so that's where that cisgender of that I express, identify, I was identified as at birth as a female, and then my presentation is all female. So with gender, then we break down into our cisgender, which is I was identified at birth as female, I present as female, I believe myself to be female, and that is the cisgender. Transgender is a breakdown into that someone was identified at birth as female, but really how they feel internally, how they express themselves, how they identify themselves is male. So when we're talking about male to female, still working within that binary system. Transitioning can involve a lot of different levels of the process. There's medical transitioning, which can involve hormones, can involve surgery, and there's legally transitioning involving your name, changing your identification on your legal documents, and then social transitioning, which I think that is probably for folks who are transitioning is that first level that they will explore, and that is presenting as their identified gender in society. So they might be, they would likely dress as the gender that they identify as, and they would use those pronouns and use a name that would reflect that gender. So then we have gender non-conforming and non-binary, which when we talk about the binary system being male and female, gender non-conforming and non-binary means that they don't see it as a male or a female either side of the spectrum, that really it can be anywhere in that spectrum. So I think a lot of folks are coming out as non-binary or gender non-conforming, of saying that I don't really recognize the male or female social constructs, and that I'm just me, or I am just who I am. And that's in the, not always, but that's sometimes folks who will use they them pronouns, or either another gender neutral pronoun. All right. Sorry, I have some things. So LGBTQ, this was pulled from the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is a great website to gain more information from. The LGBTQ youth identify themselves in an incredible wide range. As you know, working with young people, they are very creative and can, I think, break down a lot of what we as adults can see really as complex sometimes. They are able to break it down a lot quicker. And when they did a survey of LGBTQ youth, they were able to identify more than 100 different combinations or terms that would be identified as their gender. So that's where we get this. And this obviously is not all 100 of them. It was probably the most common of them. And we'll see it from agender, of just absence of gender. We have our cisgender, gender fluid or flux, gender nonconforming, and then questioning, transgender, queer, again, we see there, and then non-binary. All right, before we move into sexual orientation, is there any large questions about gender, Erin?
Yes, I was just responding to one, but somebody just asked, does non-binary mean both or neither?
You know, it means it's more neither than I think both. It's basically, I don't recognize that there is a binary system. So as we talk about gender in that social construct of like pick a box, A or B, they're saying, I want to pick box C. And so that that what they identify as non-binary is that beyond that binary system.
Another question, which I don't know that I'm going to pronounce it correctly, is what is neutrois?
Oh, shoot. I looked that up and now I forgot.
I've not seen that word either, whoever asked that.
Again, before the fires, I looked this up because I was like, I don't know that one either. Google it really quick. I know it shows up and it's not outrageously inappropriate. It makes sense and I just can't remember it right now. I'm so sorry. Any other ones?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So that is gender.
Oh.
So
I'm sorry. One person just asked about what is androgynous, and then someone just answered the neutrois is basically just neutral, yes. Null of gender.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I was like, it's really simple, and I just can't remember it right there. And was that like an English person, English teacher?
Maybe.
Yeah, I know. You teachers, I'm always like, I got all of my subjects covered, so usually the teacher crowd will help figure it out. Androgynous means appearing like neutral or identifying as neutral. It's similar to non-binary, but it's more non-binary is saying I don't recognize the binary system, where androgynous says I'm just neutral in that system.
Okay. And maybe time for one more. You probably have more slides, but what's the difference between gender flux and gender fluid?
I think it's one of the same. Gender fluid. I think it's one of those of that same thing, just different, a little bit different meaning. Of gender, that my gender is something that changes on a day-to-day basis. Okay. Fluctuates, gender fluid. So yeah, it just changes. In general, gender flux and gender fluid means that one day I can feel really feminine, the other day I can feel really masculine, the next day I might feel androgynous or agender. So it just goes back and forth, and I'm going to move back and forth with it. All right. Okay, so sexual orientation, we have our gay, lesbian, bisexual, heterosexual. Again, we see the non-binary of I don't recognize any of these as the box that I fit in. Pansexual, meaning that I recognize them, but I'll go anywhere across that spectrum. And then queer, which we've already talked about. Again, we see really the broad range of identifications, and I think what I like see the most in young people, and I just laugh because it's just they are just so genuine with it, of like, I prefer no labels, like I'm really beyond that. I'm like, sweet, I love that. I'm beyond that too. Yet, you know, sometimes they just come into our lives. So these are, again, the same Trevor Project survey of picking up on all of these different ones. I am going to move kind of quickly during these unless there's a large question, because
There's a question of, do we find that there are regional differences or age differences in how people identify?
Yes, yes, totally. And that's where I'm like some of these are really new to me. I will totally admit that I have joined TikTok during the pandemic, and those young people use a whole range of words that I do not know anymore. And I'm like, what? You guys probably know more because you hang out with young people more in your classrooms, but very regional, very age specific, especially when we talk about that word like queer. That is definitely one that is specific to generations and then specific to regions, and I would never label someone as queer unless they told me that they were.
That just popped up in the chat, so that was an excellent comment. Good job.
Thanks. All right, so trauma-informed care. I know you guys have had some of this already. I really just want to do a quick refresher of talking about it, because when we're talking about trauma, we also talk about racism, we talk about homophobia, we talk about transphobia, because those are issues that also cause trauma for the people who have to endure the transphobia, homophobia, and racism. So we have our different levels of stress. I think for most of us right now, we're in that tolerable to toxic level, because of just how much is going on and how full our cup is right now. And when I went over those different things that are happening in all of our worlds right now, none of us are absent from it. Staying in that positive range right now and keeping our cup in that positive range is really difficult. And I think, you know, for me, I'm really in that tolerable range right now, because I know that this will come to an end eventually. I don't know when that eventually is, but I know eventually it'll come to the end. And then I'm really buffered by those supportive relationships. A lot of our community is in that toxic range because, yes, we don't know when it's going to come to an end, and they don't have those protective relationships. Trauma-informed care involves neurobiology, which is how our brain is able to develop and function, and how it responds to toxic stress, adversity, and trauma. I'll be right back. This is really fun. Epigenetics, which is talking about how our genes are actually set up to tolerate that toxic stress, adversity, and it's transmitted through generations. We have our ACEs study, which was like the primary study when we're talking about the adverse childhood experiences and how they lead to later health outcomes for adults. And then our resiliency, and that's really where all of us as educators and helpers and social workers are a big part of what make people resilient. So one of the big things of why we're talking about today, we're going to go into some really kind of not great stats. We talk about our LGBTQ community because we want to be able to prevent further harm from happening, that we can't just ignore that this is an at-risk population. So if we can prevent it, if we can predict it, we can prevent it. And we can prevent it by creating communities in which everyone can thrive, building resiliency in our families, and helping people to understand the impact of trauma and heal from their experiences. All right. That was a lot of information, and we have a lot of information to go, and I'm going to have to talk quicker because I'm running out of time, which is usually the case because I talk a lot. So just take a deep breath. I'm going to take a drink of coffee. And we'll look at the cute dogs. I'm obsessed with dogs, and we can talk more about dogs at a different training. All right, let's continue. So now we're going to be jumping into like really the heart of the LGBTQ and mental health, and really what places them at risk. Also, I will say I had a really difficult time putting this slide in during Corona times because they're holding hands, and we just all know that that's not really happening right now, but I put it in anyways because I think it's a really great picture. So in general, our LGBT, so I didn't add the Q because the where I pulled this information from didn't have the Q, so I didn't want to misrepresent the information. And you'll oftentimes see that in research or just like what you're reading, is it will be missing one of the letters. And that's just probably because that's not how they identify the population. So overall, health disparities is that LGBT youth are 2 to 3 times more likely to attempt suicide, are more likely to be homeless. Lesbians are less likely to get screened for preventative cancers, and that can be because of uncomfortable talking to healthcare professionals about risks. Gay men are at higher risk for HIV or other STDs, especially among communities of color. Some of that has to do with stigma. Lesbian and bisexual females are more likely to be overweight or obese. Transgender individuals have a higher prevalence of HIV, STDs, victimizations, mental health issues, suicide, and are less likely to have health insurance than heterosexual LGBT individuals. So when we talk about the LGBT community, transgender individuals are really probably at the highest risk for a lot of these health disparities, because they're the most stigmatized, I believe, and that there's just a lot more community transphobia and stigmatism around transgender individuals. So LGBT populations have the highest risk of tobacco, alcohol, and other drug use. I think that's probably what we see most in our young people, is just that high use of tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs. And then the LGBTQI, which I stands for intersex community, face discrimination, prejudice, denial of civil and human rights, harassment, family rejection, and can lead to a new or worsening symptom, particularly for those intersecting race and socioeconomic identities. So again, we don't live in these bubbles of I'm only this or I'm only that. That these two things intersect and create us, and those people are more at risk. All right, so some important factors in, I guess, Erin, do we have any questions?
Nope.
Okay, great. Not great. You can ask questions. I love questions.
Comments, but not really questions. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So important factors of LGBTQ, of talking about rejection and the coming out process. It was National Coming Out Day on Monday, Tuesday? Monday. Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and Sunday was National Coming Out Day. There we go. Days of the week right now in COVID time, it's real difficult.
What are days anyway? Yeah.
Yes, what are days? Especially I woke up last Friday and thought it was Saturday, completely convinced myself. I was so sad. But Sunday was National Coming Out Day. Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day. Both really great recognizing those communities. But coming out can be a really difficult or traumatic experience. a little bit of a personal share, I didn't come out until later in life. I was in my early 20s. And a large part of that was not because I didn't know what that I was queer, or that I didn't identify as heterosexual. It was because I was so fearful that my family was going to reject me, that I wanted to make sure I had everything figured out. And that was a good time where at least I had a good job. I had health insurance. I didn't have a great job. I had an okay job. I had health insurance. I was in grad school. Like, there was a lot of things that if my parents rejected me, if my family rejected me, I knew I would be okay. I also moved away from my family when I was 18, a little bit before that. But so I didn't have them in my life all the time of where they might be able to like figure it out sooner. But that the coming out process for a person in the LGBTQ community can be incredibly difficult for some, and especially when there's that fear of rejection. As you can see, 40% of LGBT adults have experienced rejection from a family member or close friend. I think also knowing that if I want to be this person who I know who I am, I might lose some people in my life, and that's really hard to face. And I think keeps a lot of folks from coming out, and there's a lot, that's where that fear and that shame come from. I do also want to acknowledge that on that 40%, there's that 60% that didn't have that, and that coming out was okay, and that it was something that was celebrated and honored. So with what couples with that coming out process is oftentimes young people lose their housing from that rejection of the family, which leads to the increased homelessness in the LGBTQ youth and young adults are 120% higher risk of experiencing homelessness, and especially among those Black LGBTQ youth. And that is largely because usually their family of origin rejects them, or it's just not a healthy place for them to be. So that of where the family member, caretaker, guardian says, you can stay here, but you cannot do that in my house, and you cannot be that person, or you cannot dress that way, or you cannot be who you are inside. And that trauma is that builds is not because of the individual, it's usually because of the environment around them that breeds the homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and bullying. And the bullying especially is what we usually with our young people, with our adults too, but a lot with our young people, because there's that more interaction with peers. All right. So some other important factors for the LGBTQ community is looking at those substance rates again. The higher rates of substance misuse or overuse. We categorize it as like misuse or overuse because sometimes it's not always like a substance abuse issue, but oftentimes they're using substances to help either diminish the feelings of guilt and shame, diminish the feelings of being gay, that it's, a lot of young people are using substances to feel anything but what they're actually feeling. And then that also rolls over into adulthood, and that's when you'll see more of like the substance abuse disorders for the LGBTQ community. But LGBT adults are nearly twice as likely as heterosexual adults to experience an substance use disorder. And then our transgender individuals are 4 times as likely as our transgender or cisgender individuals to experience a substance use disorder. So as you can see, there is a large portion of the community is impacted by substance use. During grad school, that was a large focus of my studies, was on LGBTQ community and substance use. And really there's not a lot of stuff out there besides like, make sure you're asking people about like, do they identify as LGBTQ? Do like asking them their pronouns. asking them, using kind of that, do you have a significant other, or that gender neutral language as when you're talking about maybe a romantic connection. But beyond that, there isn't like a ton out there that would say like, this is the magic ticket in providing substance use treatment to the LGBTQ community. There was some like around like having an LGBTQ only treatment center, but those are really rare and really expensive. So next, we jump into suicide in the LGBT community, which is one of those things, along with the substance use and homelessness and mental health care, it's an epidemic in the community. Again, a lot of it is coming from that shame and that guilt of kind of what the environment is telling them that they are not worthy of, because they identify as LGBTQ. So LGBTQI population is at higher risk than heterosexual cisgender population for suicidal thoughts and attempts. And that high school students who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual are almost 5 times as likely to attempt compared to their heterosexual peers. And I would say that like a lot of the times you might not know the young person identifies as that. I feel like nowadays, like that's something that people might disclose, but that would be something that oftentimes would come out after there was a suicide death, that they did identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and then that was something that would come out later. But that when we're talking about the LGBTQ community in middle school, high school, they're at very high risk for suicide or suicidal thoughts. And then 40% of transgender adults have attempted suicide in their lifetime, compared to less than 5% of the US population. That's a very stark difference in numbers. A large part of that can be the shame and guilt. Sometimes a large part of it is just not being able to sit and be in the body that they see. It's incredibly expensive, and there's a lot of hurdles to go through those changes or those transitioning that we talked about earlier, whether it's medically or legally or even socially. And so, and a lot of that also depends on like insurance or access to healthcare. So I think that's a large reason why we see that really large number of transgender individuals. And with that, it's just a large portion of the LGBT community has inadequate mental health care. I think one of my biggest pet peeves as I was going through the coming out process was looking for a counselor, and I would say, hey, I'm really struggling with my identity. I would really love someone to talk to. And they're like, great, we're gonna have to outsource you to someone. And so yeah, we'll get you set up with, because we don't have anyone with, it was a HMO. We don't have anyone within our HMO that can service you. Oh, okay. So then I already am like, wow, I'm so different that no one in this HMO can service me or provide service to me to help me with my identity issues. And then they send me to, and I'm sure she was a very nice lady, but she was probably about 70 years old, little gray-haired old lady, and all she wanted to talk to me about was making a shopping list for my food for the week, and just wanted me to make a list of things. And I'm like, this is not what I want to talk about. And anytime I brought up my kind of sexuality or sexual identity, the conversation would be quickly turned around. And so that's where it's like, when people are going out to look for treatment and then they're met with that, it's kind of like, whoa, what's happening? So I really struggle when providers put like LGBTQ friendly, and I'm like, I really hope you're friendly to me, like that'd be great, but I really want you to be competent and be aware of what I'm going through and be aware of like what the process is of coming out. I just don't want a nice friend when I'm struggling with my identity. And I think we see that a lot in allies. And I think that's, I understand where it's coming from, a really great place, but also realizing that that's not the best way to provide treatment or adequate mental health treatment. All right.
Sorry.
Oh, I was checking the time and Suri decided to talk to me. Is there any questions, Erin?
No, just a comment that I think is super important to highlight. I'm going to scroll back up for a second. It says that the life expectancy of a Black trans woman in the US is currently 37 years old, which I suspect you're aware of, but just really wanted to bring that to light.
Yes, that's incredibly important to bring up, and thank you for whoever brought that up. And they are just probably on the scale of most at risk for community violence and murder in our society. And so, yes, when we're thinking about kind of just who is at most risk in our community, it would definitely be transgender Black individuals. So, and it's the stark difference of life expectancy is pretty mind-boggling.
Another thing that has popped up here, I'm going to read two because I think one is a response to the first one, but also important to highlight, which, hold on. It starts with, I've heard that BSD employees can get 10 free counseling sessions, which is true through the EAP. Is there anything like that for students? The next comment is, yes, and something that we can do as educators is have more trans and Black trans and LGBTQ representation and integration into our curriculum, all of our content areas. I think that's important, but I don't know if that explains that we could do some counseling or have resources for our students.
Yeah. So I will say in Washington County, it's incredibly hard to find, you know, the niche of providers for LGBTQ and BIPOC youth or individuals in general. So that's one area that I was just talking with my supervisor this week around, like, it's just a huge gap, and it really is hard when we're trying to provide competent, culturally aware services, because we know it's not there. It's in Portland, but Portland is really far away for some of our families and for ourselves. But yeah, so I will definitely share some counseling resources with you all. I have quite a few number of slides to get through still, but I will share some of those, and EAP is a great thing to reach out to. And I guess really quickly too, Trevor Project is another one that is a crisis line and has a texting crisis line. So
I do want to say Kim, one of our nurses, being awesome, just wants to make sure that we highlight that both Merlot and then I think it's Bleeverton High School have school-based health centers that have mental health providers that have knowledge in those areas and can be a good resource.
Yes, and they both take OHP
and uninsured.
And uninsured, yes, yeah. So thank you for those, and there's a couple other options as well, and so I'll get those out to you to make sure that you have those. So some more stats, which I probably am just going to go through quickly, but only 37% of LGBTQ youth or LGBT youth report being happy, while 67% of non-LGBT youth say they're happy. However, over 80% of LGBT youth believe they will be happy eventually, with nearly half believing that they will need to move away from their current town to find happiness. And so I think it's really that focus on that sometimes where they're living, whether it's their family of origin or just the environment that they're living in, is not conducive to supporting who they want to be. Yeah. All right. So LGBTQ students in schools, compared to their straight peers, LGBTQ youth who report experience higher levels of school bullying and victimization also report higher levels of suicidal thoughts, feelings, and actions, and substance abuse and other risky behaviors. I don't think that's like new information to us, but I do want to highlight it because of the fact that a lot of times when we see the substance use behavior, the suicidal thoughts or feelings or depression or anxiety, but we might not be asking that right question and kind of seeing if really what they're struggling with is their own identity and how they fit into this larger kind of community. According to Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, the National School Climate Survey, 74.1% of LGBT students report being verbally harassed in their school based on their sexual orientation. 55.2% were verbally harassed based on their gender expression. I think this is really important to highlight those numbers. I mean, we're talking about over half, or about half, and then 3/4 almost for the two populations. And while I think that some of our own thinking can be really progressive, that they're still being harassed. And I remember sharing with a coworker about my partner and I were denied for housing because we're a queer couple. And it wasn't really because, like, I can't really pinpoint it on that, but it was pretty obvious that as soon as they found out that we were queer and we were getting married, that we had been approved, we were going through the process, and then all of a sudden they're like, no, I'm sorry, we're not accepting your application. And when I was telling a coworker this, they were just like, no, that doesn't happen in Oregon. That just can't happen. And I'm like, yeah, it does all the time. And so just remembering that, like, even though our thought process, we might really be open and welcoming, that's not always what people are experiencing out in kind of the school or out in the community. All right. So these challenges have been shown to affect the youth's development into a healthy, successful adult. Those outcomes include the negative academic performance, including absenteeism. If they're getting harassed at school, if they're getting bullied at school, if they're even just being kind of just ignored because they're part of the LGBTQ community, they're not going to show up to school. So that's going to really impact their academic performance. I in high school barely showed up and barely passed high school, or barely passed my senior year because I was absent so much, because I just really couldn't deal with my peers anymore. And that mental health concerns is a very large priority. Again, if we're not feeling really well, kind of in our mind, our body's not going to feel well. We'll see those risky behaviors, drug use. Sometimes we'll see more of the risky sexual behaviors as well. And then self-harm and suicidal thoughts. And this is really what I want to hit home, is that with all of these things, that LGBTQ youth who feel they can talk about their problems to just one school staff member are 30% less likely to report making multiple attempts than those who do not have a safe adult to talk to. And this is because I really want you to recognize and realize and sit with the fact that you are that one person, or you could be that one person, and that can make the biggest difference in a LGBTQ student's life. I think we also know that just in general, in a young person's life, that can make a large difference. But knowing that they are someone that they can talk to about their identity, or even kind of let that guard down for a moment, can really do a lot for their mental health. Black, transgender, and non-binary students report double the rates of seriously considering and attempting suicide in the last 12 months compared to cisgender Black LGBT or LGBTQ youth. So we're looking at the numbers that are almost double for our transgender population. And I think it's, again, it's that intersectionality of when we think about that wheel of that you are getting pushed to that marginalized community so much that you feel marginalized and you feel like you don't have a place in society, and that's really not the environment that we want for our young people. So right now with how are we doing on time? Oh, we're doing great on time. Okay, I can slow down. Yes. It always happens that way. I like get super nervous and then I start doing some stuff. Do we have any questions? That would be a good, or comments or things that we want to highlight.
No, just comments of another place to find resources for students is GSAs. They could have a lot of resources.
Yeah, and so as we talk about kind of like LGBTQ youth and coping with COVID, a large part of what they're coping with is that loss of connection of like GSAs and having that teacher that they can talk to, and having those adults that accept them, because a lot of the times they might be out at school or might present a certain way at school, but then at home they can't present that way. And right now when we're talking about 7 months at home with folks that might not accept or appreciate or love who you identify as, it really gets to a point of that the hopelessness and helplessness sets in, and it doesn't feel like it's ever going to end. And we're talking about young people who sitting with that much all the time is difficult. As an adult, that's difficult. As a young person, I think it's a lot more difficult, because of just how young people's brains kind of work and deal with stress. So when we talk about the impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic, one of the great ones is that isolation for the LGBTQ community and that disconnect from social supports. Definitely like middle, like K through 12, but then even like, I think I heard more conversations about college students in the LGBTQ community having to go home because they kind of, they live away from home. They maybe came out during that school year, or they have a very different set of social supports. And then when they return home, or when they were forced to return home, they no longer had those social supports. And that it created a lot of stress on them. And so that still is a conversation, right? Because there's not a lot of colleges that are fully back in session, or that are going to probably remain in session for the whole school year. The housing comes into play again, that we're talking about young people who might be living with adults that aren't supportive, and that might threaten them for identifying as LGBTQ. When we talk about the economical strain, this is more for like the adults in the LGBTQ community. A large portion of adults in the LGBTQ community work in service industries such as restaurants or retail, and there's a lot of job losses in those areas. And yeah, I think, was it Human HRC has like a really good breakdown on that. I didn't include as much of that because we're talking about youth, but I did want to talk about it a little, or at least acknowledge it. And then when we talk about medical care, especially for our transgender individuals, really early on in the pandemic, medical care like essentially stopped for non-COVID issues. LGBT, or mainly trans or non-binary individuals who were maybe looking forward to surgery or other medical interventions weren't able to have those appointments. And most of them have restarted, but they were delayed for a number of months. So someone who's transgender and sitting in a body that really does not feel like theirs, and they body dysmorphia is what the term is called, and that it creates a lot of distress of sitting in a body that does not feel like it's yours and does not feel like you're connected to, and that those medical appointments were delayed. for those individuals. Any questions or comments on this, Erin?
Nope.
All right. All right, so getting into like supporting our LGBTQ youth. I said this earlier, is that the elevated risk of these individuals is not due to who they are attracted to or who they, or they're being a gender non-conforming person, that it's, the risk is really the environment around them. And whether that is actual physical harm or microaggressions or the kind of homophobia, transphobia comments, that is really what creates the unsafe environment and living. So thankfully that there's something each of us can do, which is to create safer spaces and inspire brighter futures, and build a positive, empowering environment for everyone. And that can be life-saving. All right. And then okay. So really, when we're talking about what is those, how else do we support our LGBTQ youth? It goes back to the basics. It's building rapport is essential, that we have to have a relationship with our young people in order for them to trust us and to open up to us. And that, and especially for our BIPOC and our LGBTQ youth, that we make it as clear as possible that we are safe and that we are someone that they can talk to about what's going on with them. That can be the visual cues of rainbows, the safe zone flags, any of the flags supporting the LGBTQ community. There's a ton of them. Black Lives Matter signs. We recently bought a rainbow flag with a Black Lives Matter sign all in one. It's pretty cool. We were really excited about it. But all of those visual cues are something that reminds the person that they're safe. Asking pronouns is a great way to show that you're a safe person. I will say that a lot of the feedback that I've heard from folks and have gotten is that like asking pronouns is, again, that secret way of saying that you're a safe person. So that it's not a requirement for everyone, but that for folks who are sharing it, that is that, like, again, that secret code. This really came up around, I'm trying to think of where I've had this discussion like recently a couple times, because this has become more of a practice in meetings and in social circles. But if you're someone who doesn't understand what that means, or kind of don't understand trans culture or trans, like the safety net, it can put trans people at risk. It can also put trans people in a really uncomfortable situation to out themselves if they don't want to out themselves. And I said trans, but I also mean like non-binary as well. If trans or non-binary folks are forced to like put their pronouns in their Zoom profile, and then they have to sit and look at a pronoun that they might not actually identify that whole meeting about. I will also say with Zoom, that's another place that mainly trans and non-binary folks, or folks that deal with body dysmorphia, can feel a lot of body dysmorphia because they're sitting there for however many hours a day just staring at a picture of themselves, and it can feel really jarring if that picture is not how they actually feel or identify in their body as. Just a couple things to think about. Again, I don't have like great answers to it, but just some things to stop and think about as we move through this virtual world and become better allies and supporters of the LGBTQ youth in our life.
Just wanted to add on that, because pronouns happens to be like one of my number one issues as someone who doesn't like them. Is I like it when people just say something like, consider sharing your pronouns, and then just move along, versus getting into a system where everyone just feels like they need to share it in a big circle, which is horrible in my perspective. So just saying consider, or just be aware of, or share if you're comfortable, but this like starting every meeting with sharing it constantly or posting it on everything or renaming yourself for some people is the worst, which you just said. I feel that way about it. It drives me absolutely nuts.
Yeah,
but for other people, it feels fantastic. But I'm telling you that I am not that person. You don't need to know my pronouns. You need to know my name is my opinion generally. So I want to respect everybody's opinion on that. But it is just like gives me the cold sweats every time. So
yes,
anyway,
thank you for sharing
we can
that.
move on. I just wanted to add that perspective.
No, I really appreciate that because yeah, it creates a lot of anxiety for folks. And again, like I know that sometimes it can feel like, well, then I can't do anything right, but you can, and it's just something to be aware of. Again, and it's not preferred pronouns, it's just pronouns. What's your pronoun? It's not your preferred sexual identity. It's my sexual identity. I don't really have a choice about it. It's just who I am. Just some of those words that can, well, they're microaggressions of they just cut real deep, real fast. So
agreed.
So do your own research, seek out your own kind of experts. If you know, I definitely know that there's folks in your school community that are happy to help have these conversations. If you have questions, find someone that you can kind of run these by. Same with doing like anti-racism work though, of that you're doing your own research. You're not just depending on the people in that community to educate you, that you're also putting the effort in, but then kind of checking in of like, hey, do you have time to have this conversation? And if you don't, then that's okay too. I'm also more likely to have a conversation with someone if they buy me coffee. So when you're asking someone to help you grow and expand your knowledge, also kind of paying them back for that in one way or another. If you don't know, ask, but stop to think about the purpose and the assess safety. So if I'm, so a lot of that has to do with like, am I asking for my own curiosity? Am I asking because I haven't done my own research? Or am I asking because like I'm working with a teen who just said a word that I'm like, I have no idea what that means. And I don't even know how to look it up because I don't even know how to spell it. Like, so that would maybe be a time where I would say like, okay, this is an okay reason to ask because this is a subculture that I'm not a part of. I'm not a Gen Z, I think is what we call them. And then, but I'm going to also assess for safety. So I'm not going to ask in a big room of like 30 folks. I might ask in like a one-on-one or a small group conversation. Or I might ask another young person that I know in my life that might be knowledgeable about that because I have a better connection with that other young person. And then respect, accept, and nurture. That really our biggest thing is that we want for our LGBTQ youth to grow up to be resilient, healthy, lively, livable adults of having their best kind of future. All right, and then lastly, I want to talk about working with parents of LGBTQ youth because it's definitely difficult to work with a parent who's resistant or who doesn't understand or who is, I guess, downright like abusive. And that's a little bit different, but like that we do want to treat parents with empathy. This might not be something that's even within their scope of like what they've dealt with in their past or in their like what they thought they would deal with. And so that even though they might not be initially fully supportive of their LGBTQ identity, one last time. That we do still want to have empathy for them and that show that empathy. I was consulting on a young person who identifies as trans, and for these parents, it's been very difficult. And then I was working with kind of the person I was consulting with, and the provider shared like, yeah, but like the dad asked a question about like, well, why can't you just be gay? And it really showed that like this dad really is trying to understand, but also doesn't understand that gender and sexuality aren't the same thing and aren't even on the same playing field. And so like this dad really just is needing more education around the LGBTQ community, and that we can provide that. We can provide supports for them. We can provide resources from them. But it's just more about education. Avoid appearing overly judgmental when working with an unsupportive parent. The goal is to establish that support for the youth to require a positive working environment or working relationship with the parents. So a lot of that is that if the parent doesn't let the youth around you anymore, then you can't be a support for that young person. So wanting to make sure that we're able to still be in that young person's lives and be a support and be a lifeline for that young person. And we can't do that if the parent cuts off contact. Validate parents' emotional reactions. I think one of the things that I always remember is that when I came out to my parents, I had, almost 20 years to kind of think about my identity, and well, probably like 15 years of really like sitting with it of like what's going on, where I tell my parents and they have about 30 seconds to react. So luckily I have the best parents in the whole wide world, and it was like an after school special, and my dad was so supportive and even really had to stand up to other family members. But that the parents' emotional reactions are those initial emotional reactions, and giving them a chance to kind of sit with it and then come back. So if that young person comes to you and like, my parents aren't supportive, of really trying to remind them that they might need some time to understand what this means. So let's see what education we can provide them. Like, let's see if there's some books or websites we can point them to. And then PFLAG is a great resource in our community, and pretty much in every community. I even lived in La Grande, Oregon, and there was a PFLAG out there. So encourage parents to reach out to other parents that have LGBTQ youth, because that's going to help them understand what it means to be a parent of an LGBTQ youth. And with that, those are some of the resources. I will put together some more so that I can send it out to you all. But the Trevor Project is a great one. PFLAG is another great one. And then there was I think it's like a 60-minute to 90-minute video about safe places, safe spaces, and creating a welcome and inclusive environment for traumatized LGBTQ youth. So it's a little bit more clinical, but I think too there's a lot of valuable information.
Glisten is also great as well.
I'm sorry?
Glisten is great as well.
Yes. So is there any questions?
Nope, we're getting some thank yous. We're pretty amazing. We wanting some copy of the slides that you just talked about.
Yeah,
I got two lengthier questions in private chats that I was going to talk with you about after. Okay. One is just more curriculum and kind of approaching sort of these topics from different disciplines, if that makes sense. It was a longer question, but kind of a cool one, or a very cool one, excuse me. And then another one asking for very specific sort of like materials, literature, poems, like ways that teachers, like who they could be incorporating into their curriculum. So I don't know if BSD has a resource place for that yet, or I
wonder if Gretchen Mueller would be a good resource for that.
I office about 2 feet from her, so I'll check in with her as well. But that was a great question that we got privately of to see if there's something. Oh, someone's saying there is a page of that. So Gretchen knows it. So I'll just check in with Gretchen about that to make sure that we can send that out there.
And I can, maybe Erin, you and I can make like a Google Doc so that it could be accessible and we can link some of these things.
I think that would be great. Yeah, we're getting tons of thank yous. The pronoun conversation was quite popular.
Which I thank you for that.
Oh, maybe that makes up for me screwing up everything at the beginning.
Oh.
Just want to make sure there's lots of stuff in here. Hold on. Yeah, people just wanting to be able to use this presentation for GSA. And some comments that you probably can't really respond to, but just issues with names showing up in Zoom. So it defaults to whatever name is in Synergy, and kids might be going by a different name.
Yes. Oh, I saw
those
again,
sorts of
I'm gonna
things.
admit to, like, I saw a TikTok about that of a
Okay.
kid logged into his like college class with like a different Zoom, like his,
Oh,
like it was, and he was really crushed by it. So yeah, I think helping set up that space, and just like if you see something, kind of reminding folks of like, hey, do you want this? Because I was telling someone, like, I have like 3 Zoom accounts, and so I never know what name shows up, which it's either Deanna Negretti, she, her, or Deanna Negretti, Washington County Behavioral Health, she, her.
yep.
So, but I want to
Once a-
thank you all for
yeah,
coming and release you on time. I really appreciate you all attending. I
absolutely.
know
Thank you, everyone.
yeah, it was so great to have you all here. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'll make sure my contact information is available.
I'm
But
gonna,
have a great afternoon.
do you have a minute to stay,
Yeah.
Deanna? Okay, I'm gonna stop recording on